Take a breath. Let your shoulders drop. Wherever you are right now, let that place hold you gently. Tonight, we're going to drift together through 100 quiet facts about one of the most legendary automobiles ever to turn a wheel on this earth. A car that engineers dreamed into existence on winding mountain roads and rain-soaked test tracks. A car that became something more than metal and machinery, something closer to myth. The Nissan Skyline GT-R R34. Over the next few hours, you don't need to remember anything. You don't need to hold on to any of it. Just let each fact wash over you like a long, slow wave and carry you somewhere still and peaceful. There's nothing you need to do right now. Just listen. Let's begin at the beginning. Not with a roar, not with speed, just with a date and a factory floor and the quiet hum of something being born. It was May of 1998, somewhere in Japan, on a production line that smelled of fresh steel and cutting fluid, and the particular clean sharpness of a new machine coming together. The first R34 GT-R took shape. May 1998. Production began, quietly, without fanfare, the way most extraordinary things begin, with careful hands, with patience, with purpose. Just let that settle for a moment. A car that would go on to captivate an entire generation of enthusiasts around the world started as everything starts, one piece at a time. Officially, Nissan would list the R34 GT-R across a production window spanning 1999 to 2002. Those are the years that most historians and Nissan's own records point to when tracing this car's life. 1999 to 2002. 3 years on paper. 3 years that somehow stretched into decades of reverence. When you think about it, 3 years is such a small window of time. A long summer, almost. And yet from that narrow window came something that the automotive world is still talking about, still chasing, still dreaming about, more than 2 decades later. Some things don't need a long time to become permanent. Drift with me for a moment to August of 2002. This is a date worth holding on to. Not with tension, but with a kind of gentle attention. August 2002. That was when production of the R34 GT-R came to a close. The last one rolled off the line, was checked, was documented, and the factory moved on. Just like that, the chapter closed. But August 2002 carries a second significance, one that would matter enormously to car collectors and enthusiasts on the other side of the world, many years later. In the United States, there is a rule, a simple, patient rule. A vehicle manufactured outside the country must wait 25 years before it can be legally imported for road use. 25 years. And so, with production ending in August of 2002, the clock began to tick. Slowly, steadily, like a heartbeat. And the world waited. Nissan's official timeline places the R34 as a 1998 to 2002 model. That's the full arc. from that first car taking shape on the line in May of 1998 to the last one completing the journey in 2002. 4 years of official existence. A model year lifespan that, compared to many cars, is actually quite brief. But the R34 was never really about how long it lasted. It was about what it was while it was here. Here is a fact that carries a particular weight, a particular kind of quiet sadness, if you let yourself feel it. The R34 GT-R was the last GT-R to carry the Skyline name. The Skyline GT-R, a lineage stretching back to the late 1960s, through generations of engines, chassis, aerodynamics, and ambition, through the Hakosuka, the Kenmeri, the R32, the R33, and finally the R34. And then the name was retired. The GT-R would continue, but it would go on alone, without the Skyline prefix. The successor, the R35, would stand apart, a new car in a new era, bearing the GT-R name, but no longer wearing the Skyline identity. There's something peaceful about an ending when you think of it the right way. A gentle closing, a bow taken. The Skyline GT-R had done everything it was asked to do, and more. It had nothing left to prove. So it bowed gracefully and let the future come. Let that drift away now and settle into this next thought. When the R35 arrived, it brought with it a fundamentally different heartbeat. The R34, like all the Skyline GT-Rs before it, was powered by the RB26 DETT, an inline-six engine, 2 turbos, a configuration that had become almost inseparable from the GT-R identity over the years. The sound of it, the character of it, the way it pulled through the rev range, it was deeply, unmistakably familiar to anyone who loved these cars. The R35 would change all of that. In place of the inline-six, Nissan introduced the VR38 DETT, a twin turbocharged V6, a completely different architecture, a completely different sound, a completely different soul, some would say. Neither engine is lesser. Both are remarkable pieces of engineering in their own right. But there is something about knowing the RB26 was the last of its kind in a GT-R. The last time that particular configuration would sit in that particular car, that makes it feel precious, like the final printing of a beloved book. Breathe slowly. There's no hurry here, just soft facts drifting past you like leaves on still water. Now, a number. 11,578. That is how many R34 GT-Rs were built in total across the entire production run. 11,578 units. Give or take a few, some records place the figure between 11,500 and 11,600, the slight variation depending on how different trims and special variants are counted. But in round terms, we're talking about roughly 11,500 cars. In the world of performance automobiles, that is not a large number. Think about it this way. On any given busy day, a major highway might carry that many cars past a single point in the space of a few hours. And yet, that entire volume represents the whole lifetime output of the R34 GT-R. Every example that ever existed, every one that still exists today, 11,578, not a flood, a trickle, and perhaps that scarcity, that smallness, is part of what makes them feel so sacred. Let that number settle. 11,500 cars spread across the entire world, many of them still in Japan, lovingly maintained, tucked into climate-controlled garages. Some in the UK, in Australia, in other countries where right-hand drive cars found welcoming roads. Some passed from owner to owner over the years, each one adding a chapter to the car's quiet history. And then, the ones in America. For decades, American enthusiasts could only look, could only watch from afar, through import car magazines, through video games, through films, through the internet. The R34 existed for them as a kind of beautiful ghost, present everywhere in culture, present almost nowhere in reality. Because of the 25-year rule, legal importation to the United States was simply not possible, not yet. So they waited, patiently, impatiently, passionately. And then, around 2024, the waiting finally began to end. With production having closed in August of 2002, the 25-year clock, ticking all that time, finally reached its destination. The earliest R34G TRS began to become eligible for legal import into the United States, more than 2 decades after the last one was built. There's something almost poetic about that kind of patience, that a car built and finished before many of its eventual American owners were even teenagers would finally arrive, legally, properly, on the right side of the law, just as those same people reach their 30s and beyond. A car that waited for its audience, or perhaps an audience that waited for its car. And this waiting, this long, slow, beautiful delay, is not a small footnote. It is central to the story of why the R34 holds the place it does in the hearts of so many people around the world. Desire, when it cannot be fulfilled, does not diminish. It deepens. The R34 GT-R became legendary not only because of what it was, though what it was extraordinary. It became legendary also because of what it could not be for so long, because it was kept just out of reach, because loving it meant loving something you could see but not quite touch. And that distance, that ache, that is the fertile ground where myths are made. The R34 didn't just earn its mystique on racetracks and mountain passes, though it earned plenty there too. It earned it in the imagination, in the dreams of teenagers who stayed up too late playing video games. in the dog-eared pages of import tuner magazines, in the quiet longing of enthusiasts who built shrines to a car they'd never sat inside. Massive global demand, built not only from performance, but from absence. There is something almost beautiful about that, something worth sitting with as you let your eyes grow heavy. The things we love most deeply are often the things we had to wait the longest for. So here, at the beginning of our journey together tonight, we find ourselves holding the R34 GT-R at its roots. Born in May of 1998, officially a 1999 to 2002 model, gone from the line by August of that final year, the last of its name, replaced but never quite replicated, built in a number small enough to feel intimate, just over 11,500 examples to account for all the love this car has ever inspired. Kept from American roads for a quarter century by law, by time, by the slow turning of the calendar, and in that keeping, made into something that transcended the car itself. A legend, a dream with a license plate. Let the image of it sit with you now softly, behind your eyes. That long hood, that wide stance, the subtle flare of the rear haunches, the twin-turbo straight six, sitting still and quiet, just waiting. There's nowhere it needs to be right now. There's nowhere you need to be either. Just here, just still, just breathing slowly as we drift together toward the next 10 facts. Let your body grow a little heavier. Let the room grow a little quieter. We have a long, beautiful road ahead. Welcome back. Or perhaps you never left. Perhaps you've been here all along, drifting in that quiet space between waking and sleep, where facts feel less like information and more like soft, slow music. Either way, you're here now. And we're going to go a little deeper, because in this segment, we're going to open the hood of the R34 GT-R and look inside. Not with urgency, not with the noise and heat of a racetrack, but slowly, gently, the way you might look at something very beautiful under soft light, because what lives beneath that long hood is extraordinary. The engine at the center of the R34 GT-R story is called the RB26 DETT. It's worth saying that slowly. Let the name dissolve in the air. RB26 DETT. 6 characters that carry, for those who know them, an almost electric weight. The RB26 DETT is a 2.6-litre twin-turbocharged inline-6. 6 cylinders, arranged in a single row, breathing through 2 small turbochargers, displacing 2.5 litres of air and fuel with each revolution. It is, in the opinion of many engineers and enthusiasts who have ever worked on one or listened to one spin freely through its rev range, one of the finest internal combustion engines ever conceived. That is not a small claim, but it is, by most accounts, a fair one. Let the word inline-6 sit with you for a moment. There is something inherently harmonious about an inline-six engine. The firing order, the balance, the way the forces cancel each other out. It produces a smoothness that other engine configurations can struggle to match. Inline sixes have a reputation for being silky, for being refined even under pressure. And the RB26 carried all of that natural elegance, while also being an absolute animal underneath it, a quiet contradiction. The gentleness of the configuration, wrapped around something fierce and purposeful. Not unlike falling asleep, perhaps. Something soft on the surface, something deeper and more complex underneath. Now, here is a fact that tells you something about the culture the R34 was born into. In Japan, during the era when these cars were being built, the major domestic automakers had agreed, informally, quietly, as gentlemen, to cap the advertised power output of their performance cars at 276 horsepower. 276. Not for engineering reasons, not because the cars couldn't make more, but as a kind of social agreement, a nod to concerns about road safety in the arms race of escalating performance figures. The Gentleman's Agreement, it was called. And so, officially, the RB26 DETT in the R34 GT-R was rated at 276 to 280 horsepower, 206 kilowatts in metric terms, a polite, measured, agreed upon number. It was also, in practical terms, not entirely accurate. The real output of a stock RB26 DETT was something closer to 320 to 330 horsepower, maybe more, depending on the specific example, the conditions, the build variance from the factory. Nissan knew this, the engineers knew this, and most enthusiasts, even at the time, suspected it. But the official number was 276, and so 276 it was, printed in brochures, cited in press releases, stated with a perfectly straight face. There is something almost endearing about that. A polite fiction, maintained by all parties involved, while the actual machinery sat quietly knowing the truth. 320, maybe 330 horsepower, in a car that, in many trim levels, weighed just over 1,500 kilograms. That is a meaningful amount of power for that weight, enough to move very quickly indeed when asked. But we're not in a hurry tonight. Breathe slowly. The compression ratio of the RB26 was set at 8.5 to 1. That's a relatively modest ratio, especially by modern standards. And it was modest by design, because this engine was built to be turbocharged. When you're forcing compressed air into the cylinders with a turbocharger, you don't want too high a static compression ratio, or the pressure inside the cylinder during combustion can become extreme. 8.5 to 1 gave the RB26 the headroom it needed to accept boost pressure without protesting. It also gave it headroom to accept more boost, if the right modifications were made. That low compression ratio was, in a sense, an open invitation. The engine was saying, I have room, I can take more, when you're ready. And the tuning world heard that invitation very clearly. Let that drift past, gently. Now here is an engineering detail that feels almost extravagant for a production car, and yet Nissan included it as standard. Each of the 6 cylinders in the RB26 had its own individual throttle body. 6 cylinders. 6 throttle bodies. This is a configuration more commonly associated with racing engines, with purpose-built competition machinery, with cars that exist solely to go as fast as physics permits. The benefit of individual throttle bodies is responsiveness. Each cylinder can draw air more directly and freely, without the compromise of a single shared intake plenum doing all the work. The result is an engine that responds to the accelerator pedal with a directness, a sharpness that feels immediate and alive. On a production car, a car you could, theoretically, drive to the shops. Nissan built an engine for the road that had the heart of something built only for tracks. The turbochargers fitted to the RB26 were a thoughtful choice. They were ball-bearing turbos, rather than the more traditional journal-bearing design. The difference is internal. Ball-bearing turbos use small bearing balls to support the rotating shaft, rather than relying purely on a film of oil pressure. The result is less rotational resistance, less friction, faster spool-up. In practical terms, this meant the turbochargers on the R34 reached full boost pressure more quickly than they would have with the conventional design. The lag, that brief hesitation between pressing the accelerator and feeling the full force of the turbos, was reduced. Not eliminated entirely. No turbo engine of that era was without some lag, but minimized, made smaller, made more manageable. The engineers were always working to close the gap between intention and response, between what the driver wanted and what the car delivered. Ball-bearing turbos were one small, precise step in that direction. Let your breathing settle even further. There's nothing to track, nothing to hold. Just the soft details of an engine, told slowly, in the dark. For those who wanted something even further beyond the standard, there were the N1 variants. The N1 GTR was a special, stripped and hardened version of the car, built with motorsport in mind. And the engines fitted to N1 models carried specific upgrades that set them apart from the already impressive standard unit. One of those upgrades was the use of steel turbine wheels, rather than the more common alloy items. Steel is heavier in isolation, but it is also more heat-resistant, more durable under sustained extreme conditions. For an engine being asked to perform lap after lap on a circuit, under the kind of thermal stress that road driving rarely produces, steel turbine wheels offered a margin of reliability that aluminium alloy could not always match. The N1 was built for endurance, for the long game, for cars that would be asked to keep performing long after the average race car would have asked to rest. And then there was the block itself, the special N1 engine block, sometimes referred to in enthusiast circles as the 24U block, was built with thicker cylinder walls than the standard unit. Thicker walls mean more material surrounding the bore. More material means more rigidity, more resistance to the microscopic flexing and distortion that a cylinder wall can experience under high cylinder pressure. For a standard road car, the regular block is perfectly adequate. But for something being tuned significantly beyond standard output, the thicker walls of the 24U block offered a meaningful advantage. More strength, more resilience, more room, once again, to go further when asked. The 24U block became something of a holy relic in the R34 tuning community, sought after, priced accordingly. Alongside the strengthened block, N1 engines also featured improved water jackets. Water jackets are the internal passages through which coolant flows around the engine block, drawing heat away from the cylinders and keeping temperatures within safe limits. Better water jacket design means more efficient heat transfer. More efficient heat transfer means a cooler engine. A cooler engine is a happier engine, one that can sustain performance without the creeping risk of heat-related damage. It is the kind of engineering detail that you would never know was there unless someone told you. Hidden inside the metal, doing quiet, essential work. Like so many of the best things in life, invisible, unglamorous, and absolutely critical. The upgrades continued in the same quiet and thorough fashion. Oil and water pumps on the N1 and performance-oriented variants of the RB26 were improved over the standard items. Better flow rates, better reliability under sustained hard use, better able to keep the engine fed with what it needed, cool water, clean oil, through conditions that would push a standard pump to its limits. Endurance reliability, that was the goal. Not just peak performance, but the ability to sustain it, to keep performing mile after mile, lap after lap, without degradation. The RB26 was built to last. And then, resting at the top of the R34 GT-R range, sat the Nürburgring edition, named for that famous, fearsome circuit in Germany, the Nordschleife, the Old North Loop, 21 kilometers of narrow, undulating, unforgiving track through the forests of the Eifel Mountains, a circuit that has broken more cars than most manufacturers care to admit. The newer editions of the R34 were fitted with engines based on the N1 specification, stronger internals, the thicker block, the improved cooling, all of the careful, considered upgrades that the N1 program had developed, now finding their way into a road car that carried the name of one of the most demanding test tracks on Earth. And the Nürburgring had one more detail, a small, beautiful, specific detail. Gold valve covers. Let that image form gently. you open the bonnet of a Nür Edition R34, and there, sitting atop the engine, are valve covers finished in gold. Not chrome, not silver, gold. And alongside that, a gold VIN plate. The vehicle identification number, the car's own identity, marked in the same warm colour. It was a small flourish, a quiet signature, a way of saying, this one is different. This one came from somewhere special. Gold, in a sea of otherwise functional, purposeful, unadorned machinery, in the way that the finest things often are. The detail that matters most is the smallest one. And those Nür engines, with their stronger internals and their N1 derived specification, did exactly what you might expect an engine built to that standard to do. They made more power than Nissan ever officially quoted. The gentleman's agreement figure of 276 horsepower was, as with the standard car, a polite fiction. The Nür's engine, quietly, without announcement, produced well above that number. How far above is a question that enthusiasts and dyno operators have debated and measured for years. But the consensus is clear. The Nür was not constrained by the same practical ceiling as a standard R34. It was built to perform, and it performed. There is one final fact in this segment, a more grounded one, a more everyday one, and perhaps a slightly amusing one, given the context of everything we've just discussed. The R34 GT-R's official fuel economy was rated at roughly 7 to 8 kilometers per litre, which is modest. In a modern context, in a world of hybrid powertrains and efficiency targets measured to the decimal place, 7 to 8 kilometers per litre is not a figure that would win any awards. But then again, nobody bought an R34 GT-R for the fuel economy. They bought it because it had 6 individual throttle bodies, because it had ball-bearing turbos and a strengthened block and enough real-world power to reach places most cars couldn't follow. And if the price of that was stopping at the petrol station a little more often than a sensible family hatchback, well, some things are worth it. Let all of that settle now. The RB26 DETT, 6 cylinders, 2 turbos, individual throttle bodies, a compression ratio chosen with purpose, N1 blocks thick as promises, gold valve covers on the very finest examples. An engine that told one number to the world and quietly kept a larger one for itself. An engine designed not just for a single fast moment, but for endurance, for the long haul, for the kind of performance that sustains. And now, let your thoughts go quiet too. Let the engine cool down in your imagination. Let the ticking of hot metal settling into silence be the last sound you hold from this segment. Slow, still, steady. We have more road ahead. Still with me? Good. Let your body sink a little deeper into wherever you are. Feel the weight of your arms, your legs, the back of your head. Let gravity do its quiet work. In the last segment, we spent time inside the engine bay. with the RB26 and its 6 individual throttle bodies, its ball-bearing turbos, its gold-covered Nur variants whispering secrets above the official power figure. Now we're going to step back from the engine itself and look at everything around it. The intelligence, the systems, the invisible architecture of sensors and logic and carefully engineered cooperation that took all of that power and turned it into something a human being could actually control. Because raw power on its own is just chaos. It's noise, it's wheel spin and oversteer, and a car trying to go in 5 directions at once. What transforms power into performance is intelligence, and the R34 had quite a lot of it. At the heart of the R34's mechanical intelligence was a system called ATTESA AWD, Advanced Total Traction Engineering System for All-Terrain, with electronic torque split. Even the name moves slowly, deliberately, like it knows it doesn't need to rush. ATTESA AWD was Nissan's all-wheel drive system, but calling it simply all-wheel drive understates what it actually did. This was not a passive, fixed system that simply sent power to all 4 wheels equally and called it a day. This was an active, thinking, constantly adjusting system that watched what the car was doing at every moment and responded. It was, in a real sense, alive. The central function of ATTESA AWD was this. It could actively vary how much torque was sent to the front wheels versus the rear wheels in real time, depending on the conditions. Under normal driving, cruising, gentle acceleration, steady cornering, the system would operate primarily as a rear-wheel drive car. All the power going to the back, clean, simple, efficient. But the moment the system detected that the rear wheels were beginning to lose grip, beginning to spin, beginning to step out, it would intervene. Smoothly, quietly, without drama. And it would transfer torque forward to the front wheels to help pull the car back into line. The transition could happen in fractions of a second, faster than a driver could perceive it, faster in many situations than the driver could even register that anything had been happening at all. The car simply stayed composed, stayed planted, stayed pointed where it was supposed to be pointing. That invisible competence, that quiet, constant management of forces, is part of what made the R34 feel so deeply trustworthy to those who drove it. Let that idea drift past you gently. A car that was always watching, always adjusting, always doing small, careful work in the background so that the person behind the wheel could focus on the road ahead. There is something almost comforting in that image, if you let yourself feel it. Beyond the drivetrain, the R34 added another layer of intelligence in the steering. Super HICAS. HICAS stands for High Capacity Actively Controlled Steering, and the super prefix meant this was the most developed, most capable version of the system Nissan had built. Super HICAS gave the R34 four-wheel steering. Four-wheel steering. Not just the fronts turning to guide the car,
but the rear wheels also able to adjust their angle subtly, precisely, in response to what the car was doing.
At lower speeds, the rear wheels would steer in the opposite direction to the fronts, tightening the turning radius, making the car feel more agile and responsive in tight situations. At higher speeds, they would steer in the same direction as the fronts, adding stability, reducing the tendency to unsettle the car's balance during fast direction changes. It was a system designed to make the R34 feel smaller and more nimble when you needed it to, and more planted and stable when the speeds climbed. A car that could shift its personality gently to match what the moment required. Now, the systems we've described so far don't operate in isolation. They talk to each other. ATTESA ETS, managing the torque split between front and rear. Super HICAS, adjusting the rear steering angle. The traction control system, monitoring wheel spin. And ABS, the anti-lock braking system, watching brake pressure and wheel deceleration. All of these systems shared information. They used common inputs from wheel speed sensors and G-sensors, accelerometers measuring the forces acting on the car in real time, longitudinal G measuring acceleration and braking force, lateral G measuring cornering force. The systems read these numbers constantly, cross-reference them, and use them to make their respective decisions. It was a network of mechanical intelligence, passing information between its nodes the way a brain passes signals between regions. In 1999, in a production road car, that level of integration, systems not just operating but cooperating, was genuinely advanced for its time, ahead of what most of the industry was doing. A preview of where automotive technology was heading, delivered quietly in a Nissan with a Japanese domestic market badge. Of course, as with any sophisticated system, things could occasionally go wrong. A fault in one sensor or one module could trigger multiple warning lights on the dashboard simultaneously. Because the systems shared their inputs, a single point of failure could cascade. ATTESA light, HICAS light, ABS light, all illuminating at once, which could be alarming to a driver who didn't know what was underneath. For an owner or technician who did know, it was simply the car's way of saying that something, somewhere in the network, needed attention. An honest report, a transparent admission of imperfection, not chaos, just communication. And the communication didn't stop at warning lights. ATTESA and ABS were equipped with LED self-diagnostic flash codes. When a fault occurred, the relevant warning light wouldn't simply stay on, steady and unhelpful. It would flash, in a specific pattern of long and short pulses, like a kind of Morse code, to indicate exactly which fault had been stored. Blink, pause, blink, blink, pause. A language of light, spelling out the car's condition to anyone patient and knowledgeable enough to read it. For a skilled technician or an enthusiast who had taken the time to learn the codes, this was invaluable. No need for expensive diagnostic equipment in many cases. Just eyes, patience, and the ability to count flashes. It gave the car a kind of directness, a transparency. It could tell you what was wrong if you knew how to listen. The R34 also used Nissan's Consult Diagnostic Port, a proprietary interface sometimes described as an OBD1 style system. With the right connector and software, a technician could plug in and read live data from the car's various control units. Engine management, suspension, drivetrain, all accessible, all readable. It was a window into the car's internal world, a way of seeing, in numbers and values, what was happening beneath the surface at any given moment. And it brings us naturally to the most visible piece of technology in the R34's cabin, the one that put all of this data not just in front of a technician with a laptop, but right there, in front of the driver, in real time. The multifunction display. Let your eyes grow soft now and imagine the interior of an R34. Leather and Alcantara. Gauges arranged with precision. The short throw of the gear stick close to hand. And there, in the center of the dashboard, a 5.8-inch screen. 5.8 inches doesn't sound large by modern standards. In an era of large touchscreens and digital instrument clusters, filling an entire dashboard from edge to edge, 5.8 inches might seem almost modest. But in 1999, a multi-function display screen of any size in a production car was notable. And what this screen could show was remarkable. Live boost pressure. The turbochargers were working, and the screen would tell you exactly how hard. Coolant temperature, oil temperature, the vital signs of the RB26, displayed continuously, watchfully, and more. The ATTESA torque split. The exact ratio of power being sent to the front axle versus the rear at any given instant. A number that was constantly in motion during hard driving. Front 12%, front 34%. Back to zero, settled on rear-wheel drive on a clear, dry straight. Watching it change in real time was, by all accounts, mesmerizing, like watching a living thing breathe. And alongside the torque split reading, the screen could also display G-forces. Longitudinal G, the force pressing you back into your seat under acceleration, or pulling you forward under braking. Lateral G, the force pushing you sideways into the door as the car cornered. Real numbers, your body, translated into data, the physics of the moment, captured and displayed with a calmness that contrasted rather beautifully with the experience of generating those numbers in the first place. It gave the driver a different kind of relationship with speed, not just feeling it, understanding it, watching it, having a conversation with it. Let those images settle. The display went further still. It could record history graphs, 30-second windows of data, stored and displayed as a rolling chart. Boost, temperatures, G-forces, torque split, all of it traced across time, a small visual record of what the car had just been doing. Imagine that, coming to a stop at the end of a fast road or the end of a track session and being able to look back at the last 30 seconds in graph form, seeing exactly where the boost peaked, where the torque shifted forward, where the lateral G reached its highest point in the corner. It was a tool for the curious, for the analytical, for the driver who wanted not just to feel the car, but to understand it. A small data recorder built in from the factory. Before data logging was something that most road car drivers had ever considered. The display also incorporated a lap timer. A clean, simple function, but a telling one. A factory-fitted lap timer in a production road car sent a clear message about who this car was built for and what Nissan imagined them doing with it. This was not a machine designed purely for the morning commute. It was designed for drivers who would take it to circuits, who would want to know their lap time, who would care about tenths of a second. The lap timer was Nissan's quiet acknowledgement of that reality. A small gift tucked into the instrument cluster for the people who would use it. And finally, a detail that is small in size but large in character. The R34 included a user set shift light LED. A single light, discrete, functional, that the driver could program to illuminate at a specific point in the rev range. The engine reaches your chosen RPM and the light comes on. A signal, a prompt, a gentle reminder that the next gear is waiting. What matters about this feature is the word user set, not fixed, not predetermined by the factory, configurable, personalized. The driver could choose their own shift point, could tune the signal to match their own preferences and their own understanding of the engine. It gave the driver ownership, a small way of saying, this car is yours. You can shape how it communicates with you. You can make it speak in your language. In a car already full of systems doing careful, intelligent, invisible work, the shift light was the one moment where the driver could write a small part of the story themselves. And on that note, let the dashboard go dark in your imagination. All the systems powering down, ATTESA at rest. HACUS holding still. The G-sensor reading 0 in every direction. The torque split display settled at a steady, unchanging rear wheel 0. The 30-second history graph showing nothing but a flat, peaceful line. The car at rest, composed and quiet, like you are right now. Let your breathing slow a little more. Let the details of this segment, the sensors, the screens, the flash codes, the gentle logic of systems talking to each other in the dark, let them dissolve into something softer. You don't need to hold any of it. Just let it pass through, like light through glass. We'll continue, slowly, in just a moment. Still here? Good. Let yourself be heavy for a moment. Let the surface beneath you take your full weight. There's nothing you need to hold up right now. Nothing you need to resist. Just let go a little more. In the last segment, We move through the invisible, the electronics, the sensors, the systems passing quiet information back and forth, like a conversation happening just beneath the surface. Now we're going to come back to something more tangible, something you could put your hands on, something you could knock with a knuckle and feel the solidity of. The body, the chassis, the bones of the car. Because the R34 GT-R was not only intelligent, it was strong, deliberately, carefully, architecturally strong, engineered at a structural level to be something the R33 before it, impressive as that car was, simply could not match. Let's begin with a number that sounds small but matters enormously. 17 pieci millimetri. That is how much shorter the R34's body is compared to the R33. 75 millimeters, roughly 3 inches. Not a dramatic reduction. Not something you would necessarily notice standing next to both cars. But in the language of chassis engineering, even small reductions in length carry consequences. A shorter body means a shorter wheelbase, all else being equal. A shorter wheelbase means the mass is more centralized, concentrated closer to the middle of the car. A mass that lives near the center of a vehicle is easier to manage dynamically, easier to rotate, easier to control under the forces generated by fast cornering, hard braking, sudden direction changes. The R34 was trimmed, not to be smaller, but to be tighter, more focused, more precise. Like a sentence edited down to only the words that matter. And alongside that trimming came a profound increase in strength. Overall body rigidity on the R34 increased by approximately 56% compared to the R33. 56%. Let that settle for a moment, because it is a remarkable figure. The R33 was not a flimsy car. It was a serious performance machine in its own right, built with care and purpose. And yet Nissan's engineers, when they set about creating the R34, looked at the R33 structure and found more than half again as much rigidity to add. 56% more resistance to the twisting, flexing, distorting forces that a car's body experiences during aggressive driving. A stiffer body means the suspension can do its job more accurately. When the chassis itself doesn't flex, the movement happening at the wheels is precisely what the suspension geometry was designed to produce, not a mix of intended movement and unwanted chassis compliance. Everything becomes more predictable, more controllable, more honest. The car does what you ask because nothing is being lost in translation. The improvements were not uniform across the structure. They were targeted, specific, addressed where they mattered most. Lateral stiffness, resistance to forces pushing sideways across the body, improved by roughly 30%. In cornering, the forces acting on a car are predominantly lateral. The body wants to lean. The structure wants to flex. A 30% improvement in lateral stiffness meant that the R34's body resisted those forces more effectively than its predecessor, keeping the suspension geometry more consistent through corners, keeping the contact patches of the tires more squarely on the road, and camber stiffness, resistance to the rotational forces that tried to change the angle at which the wheels meet the road, improved by around 25%. Camber matters because tire contact is everything. A tire working at the correct camber angle has its full contact patch available. Deviate from that, and the tire is working at a disadvantage, generating less grip, wearing unevenly, communicating less clearly through the steering. Improving camber stiffness was, in essence, protecting the tire's relationship with the road, ensuring that the work done in suspension design translated faithfully to the tarmac. Breathe gently. Let those numbers drift like leaves. 30%, 25%, 56%. Small figures on paper, enormous in consequence. From the factory, the R34 came with front and rear strut tower bars, fitted as standard. Strut tower bars, simple in concept. A rigid brace connecting the tops of the suspension strut towers on either side of the car, across the engine bay at the front, and across the boot or cabin structure at the rear. When a car corners hard, the suspension towers on either side experience opposing forces, one being pushed, one being pulled. Without a brace, those forces can cause the towers to flex slightly, toward and away from each other, distorting the suspension geometry in the process. A strut tower bar ties the two sides together, so that force applied to one is shared across both, and the towers remain fixed in their relationship to each other. It is, in principle, an extraordinarily simple device. A bar, two mounting points, a length of metal between them. And yet the improvement in chassis feel and suspension accuracy it provides is well documented and well loved by anyone who has fitted one to a car that didn't have one. Nissan included them both, front and rear, as standard, not as an optional extra, not as a V-Spec exclusive, standard, because they understood that the chassis they had built deserved to be supported fully, from the factory without compromise. The engineers also turned their attention to the suspension arms themselves. Aluminium, where previous GTRs had used heavier materials in their suspension components, the R34 incorporated aluminium suspension arms. The goal was simple and precise: reduce unsprung weight. Unsprung weight is the weight of the parts of the car that move with the wheels. The wheels themselves, the brakes, the hubs, the suspension arms. Unlike the sprung weight, the body, the engine, the passengers. Unsprung weight is not cushioned by the springs and dampers. It must respond directly and immediately to every ripple, every bump, every imperfection in the road surface. Heavy unsprung components are slow to respond. They follow the road less faithfully. They introduce a kind of inertia that blurs the car's communication with the surface beneath it. Lighter, unsprung weight means faster response, better contact, a more honest, more constant connection between tire and road. The aluminium arms were not just a weight-saving exercise. They were a conversation, a way of making the car more fluent in the language of the road beneath it. Let that image rest for a moment. A car reading the road, listening to it, through the tires, through the suspension, through the steering, speaking back, through the throttle, through the wheel. A dialogue. The weight savings extended further. The R34 V-Spec, the performance variant of the car, shed approximately 40 kilograms compared to the equivalent R33 V-Spec. 40 kilograms, the weight of a small child or a large suitcase, packed for a long journey. In a car weighing around 1,540 kilograms overall, 40 kilograms is not an insignificant reduction. Every kilogram removed is a kilogram that doesn't need to be accelerated, doesn't need to be stopped, doesn't need to be steered around corners. It is weight that the engine, the brakes, and the chassis simply no longer have to work against. Lighter, shorter, stiffer. The R34 was being sculpted, refined by subtraction as much as by addition. Now we turn our attention upward and outward, to the aerodynamics, to the way the R34 managed its relationship with the air moving around it at speed. Because air, at the velocities the R34 was capable of, is not nothing. It has mass. It has pressure. It pushes and pulls and lifts and drags. Ignore it, and it works against you. Shape the car correctly, and it becomes a tool. The R34's engineers shaped it correctly. Beneath the front of the car, a glass fiber undertray was fitted. Undertrays are concerned with the air flowing beneath the vehicle, a stream that, on an unmanaged car, can become turbulent, can generate lift, can rob the car of stability at speed. A smooth undertray guides that airflow cleanly and deliberately, reducing turbulence, reducing lift, improving the car's aerodynamic relationship with the ground. Glass fiber, light, shapeable, strong enough for its purpose. A mostly invisible component, hidden beneath the car, never seen in photographs, rarely mentioned in conversation, but present at every speed, quietly doing its work. At the rear, the undertray was made of carbon fiber. The choice of material is significant. Carbon fiber is lighter than glass fiber, and more importantly, significantly more heat resistant. At the rear of the car, the undertray is in proximity to the exhaust system, to the heat generated by the drivetrain, to temperatures that glass fiber might not endure as graciously. Carbon fiber could, but the rear undertray served a dual purpose, managing not just heat but airflow, working in concert with the rear wing and the overall body shape to help generate downforce, to press the rear of the car more firmly toward the road at speed, to increase the load on the rear tires and improve high-speed stability. front under tray in glass fiber, rear under tray in carbon fiber, each material chosen for its location, its purpose, its specific demands. No component was arbitrary. Nothing was chosen by accident. At the front of the car, the aerodynamic intent was made more visible. A deeper front lip, extending the lower edge of the front bumper closer to the road, worked to reduce the amount of air flowing beneath the car by managing what entered the space between the car's underside and the tarmac. More flow control, more consistency, more downforce, and the intercooler opening was enlarged. The intercooler sits in the airstream, cooling the charged air that the turbos have heated before it enters the engine. More airflow through a larger opening means more effective cooling. Cooler charged air is denser. Denser air means more oxygen per volume. More oxygen means more fuel can be burned. More fuel burned means more power. A larger hole in the front bumper, translated through physics and thermodynamics, means more power at the wheels. Everything connects. The brake cooling ducts were also enlarged on the R34 compared to its predecessor. Brakes generate enormous heat. Under hard use, on a track, on a long mountain descent, through repeated high-speed stops, brake temperatures can climb to levels that compromise performance and at the extreme safety. Larger ducts channel more cooling air directly to the brake rotors and calipers, managing those temperatures, preserving braking performance across the long stints the R34 was designed to endure. Endurance, again, that word that keeps returning. This was a car built not just for a single fast moment, but for sustained, repeated, reliable performance. And the brakes themselves deserve mention. Brembo. 4-piston calipers at the front, 2-piston at the rear. Brembo is an Italian manufacturer whose name has become, in performance car circles, almost synonymous with the concept of a brake caliper done properly. Their components appear on Formula One cars, on Le Mans prototypes, on the finest road cars the world has produced. Finding them on a production R34 GT-R, fitted as standard, not as an option, not as an upgrade, said something unambiguous about Nissan's intentions. This was not a car being equipped with adequate brakes. It was a car being equipped with excellent ones. 4-piston at the front, where most of the braking force is needed. 2-piston at the rear, complementing and balancing. Large enough to resist fade under sustained use. Powerful enough to haul the car down from high speed with confidence and consistency. And so we arrive at 2 final numbers for this segment. Numbers that together describe the physical envelope of the car we've been building in your imagination through these facts. A wheelbase of 2,665 millimeters. That is the distance between the front and rear axles. 2,665 millimeters. 2.5 meters, give or take. A compact, focused dimension for a car of this capability, reflecting that earlier decision to shorten the body, to bring the mass inward, to tighten the car's proportions around a more centralized footprint, and a curb weight of approximately 1,540 kilograms. 1,540 kilograms. Every kilogram of that number accounted for. The RB26 and its twin turbos, the ATTESA system and its transfer case, the Brembo calipers, the aluminium suspension arms, the strut tower bars, the multifunction display and its sensors and its wiring, the carbon fiber rear undertray, the glass fiber front, all of it adding up to 1,540 kilograms of intention. Let the whole car rest in your mind now, not in motion, not working, just sitting still, shorter than its predecessor by 75 millimeters, stiffer by more than half again, lighter in the right places, reinforced in others, aerodynamically considered from front to rear, from roof to road, braced, managed, composed. The chassis of the R34 GT-R was not just a structure that held the other components together. It was itself an argument, a quiet, physical argument for what a performance car could be when every decision was made with care and purpose. And now it rests, as you rest, growing still, growing quiet. The details of this segment softening at the edges as you drift a little further down into the dark. We'll be here when the next one begins. Let your eyes stay closed, or let them rest, soft and unfocused, on whatever is in front of you. Either way, you're here, and the night is quiet, and there is nowhere else to be. We have covered a lot of ground together already. The engine and its quiet deceptions, the systems and their invisible conversations, the chassis, trimmed and braced and brought closer to perfect. And now, in this segment, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to talk about what all of that becomes when it's put into motion. We're going to talk about performance, about lap times and quarter miles and a racetrack in Germany that became so intertwined with the R34 story that Nissan eventually named a car after it. We'll go slowly. We always go slowly here. But the facts in this segment are facts about speed. Let's begin with the quarter mile. A quarter mile, 402 meters. The traditional measure of straight-line acceleration, a discipline with deep roots in American drag racing culture, a simple test of how fast a car can cover a straight, flat, measured distance from a standing start. The R34 GT-R ran the quarter mile in roughly 12 seconds. 12 seconds. It is worth sitting with that number and letting it mean something. In the context of the late 1990s and early 2000s, the era when the R34 was new, a 12-second quarter mile placed you in genuinely elite company. Sports cars costing significantly more, from manufacturers with longer traditions of outright performance, were covering the same distance in comparable or longer times. And the R34 was doing it from the factory, not with modifications, not with preparation, just the car as delivered. 12 seconds of acceleration, and then silence. But straight line speed, as impressive as it is, was never really what the R34 was built for. Or rather, it was only one dimension of what the car was built for. The more complete picture emerged not on a drag strip, but on a racetrack. A very specific racetrack, in a very specific part of the world, that occupies a singular place in automotive mythology. The Nürburgring Nordschleife. Let the name form slowly in your mind. Nürburgring. Nürburgring. The ring at Nürburg, a small town in the Eifel Mountains of Western Germany, where a circuit was constructed in the 1920s. A circuit like nothing before or since, carved through forests and over hills, and around the edges of a medieval castle, through 73 named corners across 20.8 kilometers of narrow, undulating, unpredictable asphalt. The Nordschleife, the North Loop, the Green Hell, as it came to be known, a nickname earned not with warmth, but with respect, a circuit that does not forgive mistakes, that does not offer run-off areas or second chances at many of its most demanding points, that changes personality with the weather, with the light, with the temperature of the road surface. Drivers fear it and love it in equal measure. Manufacturers use it as the ultimate test of whether their cars are truly good or only good on smooth, controlled test tracks, where conditions are always perfect and the road always does what the engineers expected. Nissan brought the R34 to the Nordschleife extensively during development. Not once, not occasionally, extensively, lap after lap, in different conditions, at different temperatures, in the rain and in the dry, loaded with data logging equipment, with engineers in the passenger seat taking notes, with every system being pushed to understand what it could and couldn't do when the road became genuinely hostile. The Nordschleife, during a development program, is not a glamorous place. It is cold often. The forests close in on either side of the track, and the light is grey and diffuse. The corners come at you with a relentlessness that a test track cannot replicate. There is no breathing space, no long straight to gather your thoughts, just a continuous demanding sequence of compressions and crests and blind apexes. And the R34 was taken there again and again, until Nissan understood exactly what they had built. What they had built, it turned out, was something that could lap that circuit in extraordinary time. An R34 GT-R recorded an unofficial lap time of 7 minutes and 52 seconds at the Nürburgring Nordschleife. 7:52. Let those three numbers settle gently. 7 minutes and 52 seconds to complete 20 kilometers of the most demanding racetrack in the world. To thread through Bergwerk and Kesselchen, through the long arcing left of Kesselchen, over the crest at Flugplatz, through the carousel, the famous banked concrete hairpin, and on through the forest to the finish. 7:52. In the context of road cars, this was a time that placed the R34 among the genuinely elite. It was a benchmark that enthusiast publications and track day specialists and manufacturers themselves took seriously. Because the Nordschleife, in a way that no manufacturer-controlled test track can quite replicate, reveals the truth about a car, and the truth about the R34 on that day, on that lap, was 7 minutes and 52 seconds. The word unofficial is worth acknowledging, briefly and gently. Unofficial lap times at the Nordschleife are common. The circuit is not always staffed with official timekeepers for every session. Cars are frequently timed by their own teams, with their own equipment, under their own protocols. The time may not carry the formal weight of a sanctioned record, but it is not invented. It was driven. It was real. 752 was what the R34 could do, and Nissan were proud enough of that relationship with the circuit, proud enough of those cold, grey, demanding laps through the German forest, to name a car after the track, the Nürburgring edition, the Nur. We touched on this in an earlier segment, when we described the gold valve covers and the N1 derived engine and the stronger internals. But here it's worth pausing on the name itself and what it represents. Naming a car after a racetrack is not a casual decision. It is a statement of identity, a declaration of where the car was shaped and what shaped it. It is Nissan saying, this place mattered to us. This track informed what this car became. The laps we turned there, in the cold and the grey, are in the DNA of every Nur edition we built. The Nur was not a trim level. It was a tribute, a quiet acknowledgement that the Nordschleife had done something to the R34's development that could not be replicated anywhere else, had demanded something from the car and from the engineers that had made the final product better than it would otherwise have been. Let that drift slowly past. A car named after the place that made it honest. Now let's talk about the V-Spec. The name stands for Victory Specification. Victory. Not a modest word. Not a word chosen for understatement. Nissan chose it deliberately, purposefully, because the V-Spec variants of the GT-R across the R32, R33 and R34 generations were the performance-focused derivatives, the ones built for those who wanted everything the GT-R could offer, pressed a little further toward its limits. Victory Specification, a name that carries an expectation, a promise, folded into the trim badge. The V-Spec brought meaningful hardware changes over the standard car. The most significant was the addition of an active rear differential. A rear differential sits between the two rear wheels and manages how torque is distributed between them. In a standard open differential, torque will flow to whichever wheel has the least resistance, which, in a performance driving context, often means the wheel that has lost traction receives more power, which is exactly the opposite of what you want. An active differential can vary the torque split between the left and right rear wheels electronically, in real time, directing more power to the wheel with better grip. In cornering, this becomes deeply significant. As the car turns, the outside rear wheel is doing more work, carrying more load, generating more grip. An active differential can recognize this and send more torque to that wheel, using its traction more efficiently, creating what engineers call a yaw moment, a rotational force that helps turn the car in the direction you want. It is the difference between simply having power and knowing exactly where to put it. The V-Spec knew where to put it. The V-Spec also brought a specific tuning of the ATTESA AWD system, calibrated for a more rear-biased torque distribution compared to the standard car. The standard R34 was already capable of directing torque forward under wheel spin conditions. The V-Spec's tuning held more of that torque at the rear for longer, allowing the car to behave in a more classically rear-wheel drive manner under normal and moderate conditions, while still having the full forward torque capability available when truly needed. The result was a car with a more playful, more adjustable character at its limit, one that could be more precisely steered with the throttle, that rewarded a skilled driver's inputs more directly, that felt less like it was managing the driver and more like it was working with them. The standard R34 looked after you. The V-Spec asked a little more of you, in exchange for a little more in return. And the newer editions, those gold-valved N1 engine tributes to the German circuit, came with one final detail that captures something about their personality precisely and beautifully. A 300 km/h speedometer. The standard R34 GT-R was fitted with a speedometer reading to 180 km/h, appropriate in theory for a road car operating within legal speed limits, even if we all quietly understood that the car was capable of rather more than that. But the newer editions came with a different instrument, a larger sweep, a higher maximum. The speedometer needle had further to travel before it reached the end of its arc. 300 km/h. On public roads, such a speed is of course illegal, dangerous, and entirely theoretical. But the speedometer is not only a practical instrument, it is also a statement of intent, a declaration of what the car believes itself to be capable of, a number that the manufacturer chose and placed in front of the driver that said, "This is the kind of car you're sitting in." A 300 km/h speedometer says, without words, "We are not pretending this is a sensible family car with sporting pretensions. We know what this is. You know what this is. Here is a dial that reflects the truth of the machine around you." There is something evocative about a speedometer that extends far beyond where most drivers will ever take it. The numbers sitting at the far end of the dial, rarely visited, perhaps never visited, but always present in the peripheral vision. A reminder of capacity, of potential held in reserve. The newer edition's 300 km/h speedometer was not a boast. It was an honesty, Let those images settle now. The quarter mile crossed in 12 seconds, in a flash of controlled urgency that is already over before the mind has fully registered it beginning. The Nordschleife, grey and demanding, trees closing in on either side, the R34 threading its way through corners with a focus and a composure earned through countless development laps. 7:52. A number on a timing sheet, representing something more than time, representing everything that the chassis and the engine and the systems and the engineers had contributed, distilled to a single honest measure. The V-Spec, tuned a little more toward the rear, a little more willing to play, a little more demanding of the person holding the wheel. And the Nür, sitting at the top of it all, with its gold valve covers and its stronger internals and its speedometer that stretched to 300 kilometers per hour, because it felt it owed the driver that particular truth. All of it quiet now, all of it still. The track is empty. The car is parked. The timing equipment is packed away. And you are exactly where you should be, growing heavier, growing slower. The facts of this segment softening and blurring at their edges, becoming something less precise and more dreamlike as the next segment waits patiently in the distance. There's no hurry. There never is here. Still with me. Good. The room is quiet. Your breathing is slow. Whatever came before today, the noise of it, the weight of it, is somewhere far behind you now, further with every breath. In the last segment, we stood at the edge of a German racetrack and listened to a lap time. We talked about what speed looks like when it's been disciplined, refined, aimed, when it has somewhere purposeful to go. In this segment, we're going to follow that thread a little further, because the R34 GT-R was not only developed on racetracks, it competed on them. Seriously, at the highest levels available to it, with work support, with professional drivers, with all the resources that Nissan and Nismo, Nissan Motorsport, could bring to bear. And it won. One of the things that makes the R34 GT-R's story feel so complete, so satisfying, is this. The road car and the race car were developed together, not separately in different departments, with the racing program over in one building and the production engineers in another, each doing their own thing in relative isolation. Together, in parallel, the same development cycles, the same Nürburgring test sessions, the same fundamental understanding of what the car needed to be, feeding both projects simultaneously. This parallel development is rarer than you might expect. In the modern era, the relationship between a manufacturer's road car and its race car is often somewhat attenuated. The race car uses the road car's name and carries its visual identity, but the mechanical relationship between them may be limited. Regulations, cost, and the sheer specialization of modern motorsport can create a distance between the two. With the R34, the distance was small. What the engineers learned on the Nordschleife during road car development informed the race program. What the racing program revealed about the car's dynamics and limits fed back into production decisions. The two versions of the car talked to each other across the workshop floor, and both were better for it. Let that idea rest softly. A road car and a race car growing up together, each one teaching the other something. The race version of the R34 competed in the Japan GT Championship, known as the JGTC, in the GT 500 class. GT 500 is the top tier of that series, the class for the most powerful, most developed machines, the class where manufacturers bring everything they have. And Nissan brought the RB26. In race specification, the RB26 engine was developed far beyond its already impressive road car form. The GT 500 version of the engine produced around 500 PS, approximately 493 horsepower depending on the conversion, and more than 700 Newton meters of torque. Let those numbers settle for a moment. 700 Newton meters of torque is a figure more commonly associated with large diesel trucks than with a 2.6-litre inline-six. It represents an engine that has been developed to an extraordinary degree, with racing camshafts, with larger turbochargers, with fuel systems and ignition systems and exhaust systems, all re-engineered for a single purpose: maximum performance within the rules. The engine that Nissan quoted at 276 horsepower in the brochure, politely, within the terms of the gentleman's agreement, was, in its racing form, making nearly twice that. The same fundamental architecture, the same inline-six layout, the same RB26 identity, but transformed completely by the application of everything that motorsport engineering could bring to it. The car that carried this engine into competition in 1999 was the Pennzoil Nismo R34. The name Pennzoil will be familiar to many, an American oil company, part of the sponsorship landscape of motorsport for many decades, their yellow and blue livery appearing on cars across many categories and eras. Nismo, of course, is Nissan Motorsport, the factory racing arm, the people who build the works cars, who hire the drivers, who carry the manufacturer's honor on the circuit. The Pennzoil Nismo R34 made its debut in the 1999 JGTC season. The car that had been developed in the parallel with the road version, that had been shaped by the same thinking and the same engineers, stepped onto the grid for the first time. And it was immediately competitive. Immediately competitive. That phrase deserves a moment. It is common in motorsport for a new car to take time to find its feet, to spend its first season, sometimes its first 2 or 3 seasons, being developed, being understood, accumulating data and experience before it begins to threaten at the front of the field. The combination of a new chassis, new regulations, new setups, and the learning curve of engineers and drivers adapting to a new tool can delay results for a significant period. The Pennzoil Nismo R34 did not do this. It arrived in 1999 and proved competitive from the outset. The engineering work done during the parallel development program, the Nürburgring laps, the dyno hours, the shared intelligence flowing between road and race, meant the car arrived at the grid already well understood, already well sorted, already capable of fighting for wins. Not a car still finding itself, a car that already knew exactly what it was. At the wheel for that 1999 campaign were two drivers. Eric Comas, a Frenchman, a former Formula One driver who had competed in the pinnacle of motorsport during the early 1990s before finding a long and successful career in Japanese racing. A driver known for his precision and his intelligence behind the wheel. A man who had sat in Formula One machinery alongside some of the sport's greatest names, and who brought that level of experience and technical understanding to the cockpit of the Pennzoil Nismo R34. And Satoshi Motoyama, a Japanese driver, younger, at the beginning of what will become one of the great careers in Japanese motorsport. A driver who would go on to be one of the defining figures of the JGTC and its successor series over many years. Quick, committed, deeply attuned to the R34's character. Together, Comas and Motoyama won the Drivers' Championship. Let those words arrive quietly. They won the championship. In the car's debut season. In the year the R34 first stepped onto the JGTC grid. Against established competition, against manufacturers with existing programs and accumulated experience, the Pennzoil Nismo R34, in the hands of a Frenchman and a Japanese driver working together across a season of racing, won. There is a particular kind of satisfaction that comes from a thing performing exactly as well as the people who built it believed it could. When the work is done, the laps turned, the engine tuned, the chassis developed, and then the result comes back from the world as validation. The 1999 JGTC Drivers' Championship was that validation. The R34 was not just fast on the road, not just composed on the Nordschleife, not just impressive on paper. It was a winning racing car. The championship winning car, the specific machine that Comas and Motoyama drove to that 1999 title, was not broken up, not parted out, not lost to time or moved into private hands and quietly forgotten. It was preserved. It sits today in Nissan's Heritage Collection. The Heritage Collection is Nissan's curated archive of significant vehicles from the company's history, important road cars, race cars, concept vehicles, the machines that shaped the brand, that define chapters of its story, that carry a meaning beyond their mechanical components, the cars that Nissan has decided deserve to be kept properly for the future. The 1999 championship car is among them. Somewhere in that collection, right now, the Pennzoil livery is still on the bodywork. The RB26, tuned to its 500 PS race specification, still sits in the engine bay. The cockpit, stripped and purposeful and smelling of all the things that race car cockpits smell of, still holds the shape of the season that was run inside it, preserved, held, cared for. There is something deeply moving about the idea of a preserved race car, more so, perhaps, than a preserved road car. A road car can live a long, gentle life, garaged, driven occasionally, maintained carefully. Its existence is not inherently violent. It was built for the rhythms of ordinary use. A race car was built for something different, for extremes, for braking forces and lateral G-loads that no road ever demands, for engines running at sustained high output for lap after lap, temperature rising, fuel burning, every component working at or near its limit, for the full, unrelenting attention of competition. And then, when the season ends, when the car's competitive life is over, it stops. The engines go quiet. The tires deflate slowly. The fuel is drained. And the car is still. For the Pennzoil Nismo R34 Championship car, that stillness has lasted now for more than 2 decades. Sitting in the heritage collection, composed, perhaps, in the way that things that have done everything they were built to do can be composed. But it is not always still. The car appears at events. At the Nismo Festival, most notably, an annual celebration held at the Fuji Speedway circuit in Japan, where Nissan and Nismo bring out significant machines from their history, where drivers who competed in them sometimes return, where the cars are run in demonstration sessions rather than simply displayed behind barriers. The Nismo Festival. Imagine that, gently, as your breathing slows. A circuit in Japan, on an autumn morning, the air cool and clean, the grandstands filling with enthusiasts who have come from across the country and sometimes from across the world to see these machines, to hear them, to watch them move. And onto the track comes the Pennzoil Nismo R34, yellow and blue livery intact, RB26 waking up with the particular sound of a race-prepared inline 6, different from the road car sound, sharper and more urgent and more alive. Not racing, not competing, just moving, just being what it is, one more time, in front of the people who love it. There is a word for what happens when a significant object is brought back into the light after a long period of preservation, when something held in stillness is briefly reanimated, when the past is made briefly present. The word is not quite nostalgia. That is too simple, too tinged with sadness. It is something closer to gratitude. The people in the grandstands at the Nismo Festival are not mourning that the R34 is gone from competition. They are grateful that it exists at all, that it was built, that it won, that Nissan chose to keep it rather than let it disappear, that on certain days, at certain events, the sound of that RB26 in race tune still travels across a racetrack and finds the people who need it to hear it. Let that image carry you gently forward now. the Pennzoil livery, yellow and blue, blurring slightly as the car moves, the sound fading as it reaches the far end of the circuit, turning, disappearing behind the barriers, growing distant. A championship won, a car preserved, a story that didn't end when the competition did. The R34, in racing form, was everything the road car promised, and then a little more. As you drift now, a little heavier, a little quieter, carry that image with you. The car that won, preserved somewhere quiet, waiting for the next festival morning, when it will wake again briefly and remind everyone within earshot of what it once was, what it still is. You're doing well. The night is deep now. The world outside is quiet, or nearly so. Whatever small sounds remain are distant, inconsequential. They belong to a different layer of things, somewhere above where you are right now. You're lower than that, slower than that, just here, drifting. We've been through the engine and the chassis and the electronics and the racetrack. We've sat with a championship car in its collection and imagined the Nismo festival morning and let the sound of the RB26 in race tune fade into the distance. And now we arrive at something that many people consider the most captivating chapter of the R34 story. The variants, the special editions, the rare ones. Because within the already rare population of 11,578 R34 GTRs, there are subgroups smaller still. Specific models built in specific numbers for specific reasons. Some stripped and hardened and purposeful. Some soft and comfortable and indulgent. Some so extreme and so few in number that they have become the stuff of genuine legend. Cars that most enthusiasts will never see in person, let alone sit inside or drive. These are the rarest of the rare. Let's begin with a number. 1003. 1003. That is the total number of Nürburgring edition R34 GTRs that were ever built. The Nur models, those gold-valved, N1-derived tributes to the German circuit that we have touched on in earlier segments, were not made in large quantities. They were limited, deliberate, finite. 1003 cars, and then no more. In the context of the R34's already modest overall production of around 11,500 units, 1003 Nur editions represents fewer than 1 in 10, a subset, a fraction, a number small enough to feel genuinely exclusive without being so small as to feel contrived. And within that 1003, there was a further division. 718 of those newer editions were built as V-Spec 2 newer models. The V-Spec 2 was the later revised version of the Victory specification, carrying the active rear differential, the ATTESA tuning, the full performance intent of the V-Spec designation, but with a second generation of development behind it, further refined, further dialed in. 718 V-Spec 2 Nurs, each one with the gold valve covers each one with the stronger internals, each one representing the fullest possible expression of what the R34 was engineered to be in its most performance-oriented form, and the remaining 285 Nür editions were built as M-Spec Nür. M-Spec. We'll come to what that means shortly, but hold the number for a moment. 285. Out of 1,003 total Nür editions, 285 were M-Spec. Out of 11,578 total R34 GT-Rs, 285 were M-Spec Nür. That is a small number. That is a rare car. Every now and then, somewhere in the world, one appears for sale. And when it does, the conversation that follows in enthusiast communities tends to be long and reverent, and occasionally a little feverish. 285 cars, the whole world over. Let that quiet fact drift past you slowly. Now, the N1. We've spoken about the N1 engine and its strengthened architecture, but the N1 as a complete car was its own particular thing, a homologation special, built to meet the minimum production requirements that allowed the car to compete in its respective racing category, stripped of everything that competition didn't require, built for purpose rather than comfort. The N1 deleted the air conditioning. Gone. Weight saved. Complexity removed. The audio system gone. No radio, no speakers. The cabin quieter than the standard car in a functional sense, though of course considerably louder in every other sense once the engine was running. The rear wiper removed. The boot lining stripped out, leaving bare metal where the carpeted trim panel would normally sit. These were not oversights. They were decisions. Each deletion was deliberate, each one a small reduction in mass, a small removal of something that a racing driver does not need, and a road car homologation special could do without. The N1 was not a car you would choose for a long, comfortable journey. It would make you aware, constantly, of the machinery around you, of the surfaces, of the noise, of the particular kind of aliveness that a stripped car communicates in a way that a fully appointed one does not. And the N1 came in one color only, crystal white. Paint code 326. A specific shade, thin coat, meaning the paint was applied in fewer layers than normal, keeping the weight of the finish itself to a minimum. Even the color choice was an engineering decision. Thin coat crystal white, every N1 the same, uniformly purposeful, uniformly pale. Imagine a row of them, if such a row ever existed. All white, all stripped, all identical in their intent, if not in their eventual histories. A small fleet of purpose-built machines, each one assigned eventually to a team, or a track day program, or a collector, who understood exactly what they had purchased. White and austere and serious. And then, in almost complete philosophical contrast, the M-Spec. Where the N1 stripped everything away, the M-Spec added. The M-Spec was Nissan's acknowledgement that not every GTR buyer was primarily interested in lap times, that some of the people drawn to this car, drawn to its power and its capability and its legend, also wanted to arrive at their destination without aching, who wanted leather, who wanted warmth, who wanted, in short, a little luxury alongside the performance. The M-Spec added ripple control dampers, a suspension system offering a more supple, more compliant ride than the standard or V-Spec setup, where the V-Spec suspension was tuned for control and precision. The M-Spec was tuned for comfort as well, for absorbing the road rather than simply reading it, for long journeys as much as for fast ones. And it added heated seats. Let that detail arrive gently. Heated seats. In the context of a car that shares its engineering DNA with a racing program, that carries a motorsport-derived engine and a Nürburgring-tested chassis, and a four-wheel drive system designed for extremes. Heated seats. They make the M-Spec, in the view of many enthusiasts, the most grand touring version of the R34. The most GT-like, in the truest sense of that abbreviation. Gran Turismo, great touring. A car for covering distance in comfort as well as at speed. A car that would warm your back on a cold morning on the motorway as willingly as it would distribute torque between its axles through a fast corner. The most human of the R34 variants, perhaps. The one that said, "You matter." Not just your lap time. You, the person sitting here, deserve to be comfortable. Across the water in the United Kingdom, a specialist company called Middlehurst, an established Nissan and GTR specialist, offered their own variant of the R34. The Middlehurst V-Spec was available to UK buyers and added a carefully selected package of upgrades over the standard car. Oil coolers to manage engine temperatures more effectively in the sustained hard use that British track days and enthusiastic road driving demand. Suspension upgrades to suit the character of British roads and the preferences of British drivers, and leather, bringing a touch of the comfort and quality that the UK market expected from a car at this price point. It is a small detail in the broader R34 story, but it speaks to the car's reach. That it arrived in the UK not just as an import curiosity, but as a platform that local specialists felt confident building on, developing, making their own version of. The R34 was not just a Japanese car that happened to be sold elsewhere. It was a foundation, one that people around the world felt they could take in their hands and shape. And then, at the very apex of the R34 story, at the furthest possible remove from ordinary road car territory, sits the Nismo Z-Tune. The Z-Tune. Even the name carries a different quality from the other variants. Not a specification level, not a trim designation, not a motorsport homologation, just a name. Clean and spare and confident. Z-Tune. The Z-Tune began not as a new car, but as a transformation. Nismo would take an existing R34 GT-R and rebuild it completely from a fundamental level, beginning with the engine. The RB26, that 2.6-litre inline-six we have lived with for several segments now, was stroked. The stroke of an engine refers to the distance the pistons travel within the cylinders. Increasing it through a new crankshaft and revised internals increases the engine's displacement. The total volume swept by the pistons on each cycle. The Z-Tune's RB26 was stroked to 2.8 litres. A larger engine, more displacement, more air and fuel able to be processed with each revolution. And with that larger displacement, a foundation for considerably more power than even the already impressive standard unit could produce. The result was approximately 600 horsepower. 600 horsepower from a 2.8-litre inline. 6 in a car that, at the road car level, had been officially rated at 276. 600 horsepower in a car weighing approximately 1,400 kilograms in Z-Tune form, lighter than the standard R34, by virtue of the extensive rebuilding process and the use of lightweight components throughout. The numbers that flow from those two facts, 600 horsepower, roughly 1,400 kilograms, are significant. 0 to 62 miles per hour in approximately 3.8 seconds. A top speed of around 203 miles per hour. 326 kilometers per hour. A number that makes the new edition's 300 kilometer per hour speedometer suddenly feel quite conservative. And how many Z-Tunes were built? 19. Not 1900, not 190, 19. 19 production Z-Tunes exist in the world. Let that number settle in the stillness of the room. Let the smallness of it register, not with anxiety, but with the quiet wonder it deserves. 19 cars, each one built by hand by Nismo, from an existing R34. Each one representing an enormous investment of time and expertise and material. Each one unique in small ways, carrying the specific character of the particular base car used and the particular choices made during its build. 19. Somewhere in the world, right now, there are 19 Z-Tunes. Some in Japan, some elsewhere, some in collections, seen occasionally at significant events, some driven, perhaps, carefully, reverentially, by the people fortunate and wealthy enough to own them. 19 cars, and the whole world of R34 enthusiasm arrayed around them, like planets around a very small, very bright sun. Take a slow breath. Hold all of these variants gently in your mind, if you can. Not trying to remember them, just letting them rest there. The N1, white and stripped and serious. Thin coat paint applied with the same care as every other weight-saving decision. Bare metal where the boot lining should be. The M-Spec, warm and leather upholstered, its ripple control dampers absorbing the road with a softness the V-Spec never sought. Heated seats glowing quietly on a cold morning. The Middlehurst V-Spec, across the water in Britain, oil-cooled and suspension-tuned and quietly particular to a place and a market. The 1003 Nür editions, 718 and 285, gold-valved and N1 engined, and named for a racetrack in Germany, because Nissan felt that was the most honest thing to call them. And above all of them, in numbers almost too small to feel real, 19 Z-Tunes, each one a rebuilt, stroked, 600 horsepower transformation of an already extraordinary car. 19! There is something about rarity that does something to the imagination. That makes a thing seem more vivid, more precious, more present in the mind's eye than it might otherwise be. The R34 GT-R, already rare by road car standards, contains within it objects of genuine scarcity. Things that most people who love this car will never see in person, will know only through photographs, through forum posts, through the accounts of the few who have stood next to one. And yet they feel close, they feel knowable, because the story of what they are, why they were built, what decisions made them this way, what they represent, that story is available to anyone who wants to hear it. Which is all of us, drifting here together in the quiet. Let the variants dissolve now. Let them become softer, less distinct, the specific numbers and specifications blurring gently at the edges as you sink a little further into the dark. They will be there in the morning if you want them. For now, just let them go. You're still here, and the night is still yours. There's a shift in tone for this segment. We're going to step away for a little while from the engineering and the lap times and the specifications. We're going to talk about something softer and in some ways more interesting, about how a car stops being just a car and becomes something else entirely, about color and culture, and the strange and beautiful way that an object can travel beyond the world it was born into and find itself somewhere it was never designed to go, about how the R34 GT-R became a legend, not only in Japan, not only among the people who could buy one or race one or work on one, but everywhere, in bedrooms and internet forums, and video game loading screens and cinema seats, in places where the car was known completely and could never actually be touched. That transformation is worth understanding. And it begins, as so many stories about cars begin, with a color. Bayside blue. Paint code. TV2. If you close your eyes and picture an R34 GT-R, not any particular one, just the R34 in your mind, the idealized version, the one that lives in the imagination of everyone who has ever loved this car. There is a very good chance it is blue, not navy, not sky blue, not the blue of an ordinary car in an ordinary year. Bayside blue is a specific, vivid, deeply saturated shade, somewhere between cerulean and sapphire, with a quality in direct sunlight that makes it appear to glow slightly from within. a blue that has presence, a blue that announces itself. Nissan chose Bayside Blue as the hero launch color for the R34. The color in the advertisements, the color on the posters, the color used when Nissan wanted to say, "This is the car, look at this car." And it worked. Bayside Blue became so completely associated with the R34 GT-R that, even now, more than 2 decades later, the connection between the two is almost automatic. Say R34 to someone who knows the car, and there is a reasonable chance they see blue. A color doing the work of an identity. A paint code carrying the weight of an entire mythology. But Bayside Blue was not the only color worth knowing. Nissan offered something genuinely unusual in the R34's color palette. Something that placed the car ahead of its time and gave it a visual dimension that most manufacturers simply weren't offering. Midnight Purple. Specifically, Midnight Purple 2 and Midnight Purple 3. 2 iterations of a color that wasn't really a single color at all. It was a color shift finish. A paint containing metallic particles that caught light differently depending on the angle from which you were looking, shifting in hue as the car moved, as the light changed, as you walked around it. In certain light, the midnight purple cars appeared almost black, deep, dark, absorbing the surroundings. In other light, they glowed purple, rich and strange and like nothing else in the Nissan catalogue, or, truthfully, in the catalogues of most manufacturers offering cars in that period. And in the right conditions, at dusk perhaps, or under the specific quality of artificial light in a showroom or a car park. They appeared to shift between the two in real time. Not quite black, not quite purple, something in between and somewhere else entirely. It was a paint that rewarded attention. That changed the longer you looked. That made the car itself feel alive in a way that a static color never could. These bold choices, Bayside Blue, Midnight Purple, the broader palette of vivid and unusual colors available on the R34 were not accidental. They were targeted. Nissan was speaking directly to the JDM tuner scene, the Japan domestic market enthusiast culture of the late 1990s and early 2000s. A world of modified cars, of stretched tires and aftermarket exhausts, and carefully chosen body kits, and, above all, of individual expression through a machine. This was a culture that didn't want anonymous silver or conservative dark grey. It wanted color. It wanted presence. It wanted a car that looked on the outside the way it felt on the inside when you pressed the accelerator. Nissan understood its audience. The factory colors of the R34 were not simply paint options. They were a conversation, a manufacturer and its community talking to each other in the language of hue and saturation and metallic shift. Drift with me for a moment into the interior. Because not all of what became collectible and sought after about the R34 was on the outside. the factory Nismo gauge clusters, instrument panels bearing the Nismo name, finished with a 320 km/h speedometer rather than the standard unit, became, over the years following the car's production, objects of genuine desire, sought after, priced accordingly, moved between collectors and restorers and enthusiasts who wanted to bring their car's instrumentation closer to the specification of the rarest variants. The demand was real enough and persistent enough that Nissan eventually re-released the BNR34 gauge clusters to satisfy it. That is a notable thing. A manufacturer going back into production, or making available again through official channels, a component for a car that had stopped being built years earlier. Responding to the market not with indifference, but with attention. Saying, "We hear you. We know these matter. Here they are." It is a small act of care for an enthusiast community, from the manufacturer that created the car those enthusiasts love. And in the relationship between a brand and its most devoted followers, small acts of care tend to be long remembered. Let that rest quietly. Now a thought about value. About what time does to the price of extraordinary things. When the R34 GT-R was new, when it could be walked into a Nissan dealership in Japan and ordered, with a delivery date and a color choice and a specification sheet, it was priced modestly relative to what it offered, relative certainly to what it would one day become. Period pricing was accessible by the standards of performance cars of comparable capability. The R34 was not cheap by ordinary measures, but it was not stratospherically expensive. It was a serious driver's car at a serious but achievable price point. And then time passed. Production ended. The 11,578 examples scattered across the world, and some of them were crashed, and some were heavily modified beyond restoration, and the number of clean, well-maintained, original examples began, slowly, then more quickly, to contract. Rarity does what rarity always does. Today, an R34 GT-R in good condition commands 6 figures in any serious currency. A clean V-Spec or newer can reach considerably higher, and at the very apex of what the market has produced so far, there is one transaction that sits above all others. The one that confirmed publicly and emphatically that the R34 had crossed from the world of enthusiast car into something else entirely. In 2023, a Bayside Blue R34 GT-R sold at auction. The car belonged, before the auction, to the estate of Paul Walker. Paul Walker was an American actor. He was the lead of the Fast and Furious film franchise, a series of action films centered on cars and the culture around them that began in 2001 and grew across the following 2 decades into one of the most commercially successful franchises in cinema history. Walker died in 2013. He was 40 years old. His death was met with an outpouring of grief from fans around the world, from people who had grown up watching those films, who had associated him personally with the cars and the culture they depicted, who felt a genuine and personal sense of loss at his absence. And among his possessions, carefully kept, was this car, a Bayside blue R34 GT-R, the specific car used for principal filming in the second Fast and Furious film, the only real GT-R used for the lead actor's main driving scenes. Not a replica, not a stand-in. The car. It sold for approximately $1.36 million US. At the time, this was a GT-R auction record, the highest price ever paid at public auction. For an R34 GT-R, $1.36 million. For a car that, when new, could be bought for a fraction of that sum. A car that is, at its mechanical level, 2.6 litres and twin turbos, and a 5-speed manual gearbox, and a production run of 11,578 units. A car that is steel and aluminium and glass and rubber. But of course, that is not what was being bought. What was being bought was the story, the provenance, the connection between this specific object and this specific person, and this specific moment in cultural history. The fact that Paul Walker's hands had been on that steering wheel, that those particular tires had touched the tarmac of those particular filming locations, that this car had been present at the moment when the R34 GT-R crossed from enthusiast knowledge into mainstream global awareness. You cannot put a logical price on that. And so the market finds its own price. And in 2023, it found $1.36 million, which brings us to the films. The Fast and Furious franchise introduced the R34 GT-R to an audience that dwarfed any car magazine readership, any track day attendance, any showroom visitor count. These were films seen by tens of millions of people in cinemas around the world, people who had never heard of the JGTC, who didn't know what ATTESA AWD stood for, who couldn't have told you the compression ratio of the RB26, but who, after watching that blue car on screen, knew the shape of it, knew the sound of it, or at least the cinematic approximation of the sound, knew that it was something special, something that the film treated with a reverence that communicated itself even to viewers with no prior context. The R34 appeared, and it was presented as a thing of consequence, and the audience received it that way. But the films were only one channel. Gran Turismo, the PlayStation racing game, first released in 1997, with sequels following in the years that coincided exactly with the R34's production and early years, featured the GT-R prominently, in extraordinary detail for the era, lovingly rendered with accurate performance characteristics, available to drive on fictional and real-world circuits in ways that no import law or financial barrier could prevent. For a generation of young people in the late 1990s and early 2000s, particularly in North America, where the car was legally unavailable on the road. Gran Turismo was the R34. It was the place they first encountered it, first learned its name, its layout, its character, first understood why people cared about it. The game gave them a version of the car that they could actually have, and so the cult status formed. Before a single R34 could legally turn a wheel on an American road, the car had already achieved a level of cultural recognition in the United States and around the world that most road cars never reach at all. It had fans who had never sat in one, admirers who knew its specifications better than its actual owners did, a mythology built in the imagination, assembled from film frames and game polygons and magazine photographs and forum posts and late-night YouTube videos. The R34 GT-R became a legend before it was a legal import. It became famous in the places it couldn't go, famous among the people who couldn't buy it, famous in the years when it was still young enough that the people dreaming about it were teenagers. And there is something about being loved at a distance, across a barrier, for a long time. There is something about that which deepens the love into something else, into myth, into the kind of feeling that a car with unrestricted availability and easy access simply cannot produce. The R34 was kept rare, and rarity, combined with beauty, combined with capability, combined with the right film and the right game and the right moment, make something permanent. Let those images settle now, soft and slow. Bayside blue on a cinema screen, enormous, lit from within. A color-shifting purple under a car park light, somewhere in Japan, at some hour well after midnight. A gauge cluster changing hands for more than it cost new. An auction hammer falling at a number that begins with a 1 and ends somewhere in the millions. And somewhere underneath all of it, a teenager in a bedroom in 1999, playing Gran Turismo on a grey console, learning the name of a car they would spend the rest of their life wanting to understand. That teenager is part of this story too. Maybe that teenager is you. We're nearly there. 100 facts, 9 segments, hours of quiet road traveled together in the dark. You may be mostly asleep by now. That's all right, more than all right. That's exactly as it should be. If these words are reaching you from somewhere soft and indistinct, from that warm half place between waking and dreaming, then they're doing exactly what they were meant to do. But if you're still with me, if some part of you is still listening, still curious, still wanting to know the last of it, then this final segment is for you. Because we've spent this journey in the extraordinary, in racing engines and lap records and gold valve covers and auction records and color-shifting paint, in the places where the R34 GT-R exists as legend, as benchmark, as object of desire. But a car is also, always, an everyday thing, a physical thing, a thing that asks things of the person who owns it and lives with it and drives it on ordinary days to ordinary places. And so, in this last segment, we come home. We come back to the reality of the car, to the details of living with it, to the practical, grounded, human-scale truths of what the R34 GT-R is when it is not performing for cameras or setting records or being described in reverent tones. What it is on a Tuesday morning, what it is on a cold winter day, with the heating running and shopping to collect. What it is simply as a car. The R34 GT-R was built with a 2+2 seating layout, 2 full seats in the front and 2 smaller seats in the rear, a coupe with genuine rear accommodation, not the purely nominal rear seats found in some performance cars, placed there primarily to satisfy an insurance classification, rather than to actually carry human beings. The R34's rear seats are tight. Let's be honest about that. A tall adult will find the headroom and the legroom limited, and a long journey in the back of an R34 is not something most people would choose voluntarily if alternatives were available. But they are usable. For shorter journeys, for smaller passengers, for children. They work. They exist as something more than decoration. And that distinction matters, because it means the R34 can genuinely be a car for a life, rather than only for a specific kind of carefully curated driving experience. A couple can carry 2 passengers. A parent can bring children. The car can participate in the full, slightly unpredictable texture of a real week, rather than only in its best moments. The boot, more spacious than you might expect from a car of this profile. Performance coupes, especially those with strong motorsport heritage, have a tradition of disappointing boot spaces. The mechanical components take precedence. The fuel tank sits where luggage might otherwise go. The spare wheel intrudes. And what remains is often just enough room for a small bag and an optimistic attitude. The R34 is better than this. Surprisingly so. The boot is genuinely usable, large enough for a meaningful amount of luggage for the practicalities of a weekend trip or an airport run. Not capacious by estate car standards, but generous by the standards of the company it keeps. A small, practical kindness from engineers who understood that the people buying this car had lives to live in it. There is one feature of the R34's exterior that has a specific effect on its practicality and is worth acknowledging directly. The rear wing, that tall, prominent, aerodynamically purposeful spoiler, mounted across the boot lid, so visually associated with the car, so central to its silhouette, bisects the rear view. Looking through the rear window and into the rear view mirror, the wing sits directly in the line of sight, splitting the view of what's behind you into 2 narrower sections. It's not a debilitating problem. R34 owners adapt to it quickly, as they adapt to every specific characteristic of a specific car. The wing becomes part of the car's visual grammar, rather than an obstacle. But it is real, And it is worth knowing, because it is the kind of thing that you only discover once you are actually sitting in the car, looking out. The visible consequence of aerodynamic intention, the practical cost of downforce. Step inside now in your imagination. The interior of the R34 is simple, straightforward, functional in the way that Japanese engineering of its era tended toward function over ornament. The materials are correct without being opulent. The switchgear is logical rather than beautiful. The layout prioritizes information and control over the kind of tactile luxury that European rivals of the period often emphasized. By modern standards, it reads as plain. The screens in contemporary cars are larger and more numerous. The materials have grown more sophisticated. The ambient lighting and the leather grades and the speaker systems have all advanced considerably in the years since the R34 was designed. But sitting in one now, or imagining sitting in one, there is something appealing about the absence of complexity, about a dashboard that gives you what you need and nothing you don't, about a car that trusts the experience of driving it to be sufficient, without requiring supplementary entertainment or visual richness to sustain the driver's interest. The R34's interior says, "The road is the point. Everything else is secondary." Let that sit for a moment. The turning circle of the R34 is approximately 10.5 to 11.2 meters, depending on variant and configuration. This is, frankly, not a tight turning circle. 10.5 to 11.2 meters is the kind of measurement that makes urban maneuvering, tight car parks, narrow streets, the three-point turns that city driving demands, more of an exercise than it might be in a smaller, more nimble vehicle. It is the turning circle of a car that was designed with other priorities in mind, with high-speed stability, with suspension geometry optimized for cornering forces rather than minimum radius, with a wheelbase and track width chosen for dynamics rather than urban practicality. You feel the size of the car in car parks, in tight spaces, in the places where the road narrows. The R34 is not embarrassed by this. It simply is what it is, a machine built for a specific purpose, and those proportions are the consequence of that purpose. Owners learn to choose their spaces accordingly. They develop an instinct for clearances and angles. They plan the approach to a tight maneuver a few seconds further in advance than they might in a city car. And occasionally, in a particularly unforgiving multi-story, they wish briefly that they had brought a different vehicle. These are the real textures of ownership. The fuel tank holds approximately 72 liters. 72 liters. At 7 to 8 kilometers per liter, that official economy figure from the early segments, you're looking at roughly 500 to 575 kilometers of range on a full tank, under relatively gentle conditions, less if you are driving the way the car was built to be driven. A 72-liter tank is generous. It means the stops at the fuel station are less frequent than you might expect given the economy figures. It means longer distances can be covered before the needle drops to the point where attention is required. But when you do fill it, really fill it, from near empty to full, you feel the cost of it. The liters climbing on the pump, the price following dutifully behind. Another real texture, another small, honest fact about the everyday life of an extraordinary car. The gearbox fitted to all R34 GTRs was a Getrag, specifically the V160 or V161, a 6-speed manual transmission built by the German transmission specialist Getrag. 6 ratios. Manual. A short throw shift with a mechanical directness that drivers consistently praised. The satisfaction of a well-made gearbox is difficult to overstate to those who have experienced it. There is a quality to a precise mechanical gear change that an automatic or dual clutch system approximates but does not quite replicate. The feeling of the lever moving through the gate with resistance. That is exactly right. Neither too heavy nor too light. The slight mechanical sound of the engagement. The confirmation, physical and audible, that the connection has been made. The Getrag in the R34 delivered this. Standard on every GTR, across all variants. A common thread running through the stripped N1 and the comfortable M-Spec and the racing-derived Nür. They all had this gearbox. They all offered this particular satisfaction. But the Getrag, like every mechanical component, has its limits. At extreme power levels, above approximately 700 horsepower, in heavily modified cars pushing far beyond factory specification, the input shaft of the Getrag can suffer. The forces involved at those levels are beyond what the original design was engineered to withstand, and failures can occur. For the vast majority of R34 owners, this is an entirely academic concern. 700 horsepower represents an enormous amount of modification. It is not a threshold reached casually or accidentally. It requires deliberate, extensive engine work and the acceptance that you are operating well beyond the margins the factory intended. But in the world of R34 tuning, a world we have touched on throughout these segments, a world where the RB26's low compression ratio and strong architecture have always invited further development. 700 horsepower is not an unheard of destination, and the Getrag's limitation at those levels is a known quantity, a recognized challenge with known solutions available to those who choose to go that far. The gearbox, in its standard form, is exceptional. At its limit, it is honest about that limit. Most things worth knowing are, and finally, a fact that carries a different kind of weight from all the others we have sat with tonight. Time. The R34 GT-R was built between 1998 and 2002. The youngest examples are now in their early 20s. The oldest are approaching 30. Steel, over time, rusts. Many R34s, particularly those that spent their early years in Japan, where road salting in winter is common in many regions, have developed rust. In the sills, in the floor, in the structural members and the body panels that time and moisture have quietly worked on through all the years since the factory sealed them. A rust-free R34 shell is now rare, and because it is rare, it is valuable, sought after by restorers, by collectors, by owners who want to build the best possible version of the car and need a solid foundation to begin from. Clean, unrusted shells change hands for significant sums. They are treated with the care of objects understood to be both finite and irreplaceable. There are no more being made. The factory closed in August 2002 and will not reopen for this purpose. Every shell that rusts beyond saving is one fewer in the world. The population of viable, restorable R34s contracts slowly, year by year. It is the most human fact in this entire collection that even the most extraordinary things are subject to time, to the slow, patient work of the physical world on the objects we love, that caring for them, maintaining them, preserving them, attending to the rust before it spreads, keeping them dry and covered and understood, is itself a form of love. The enthusiasts who spend hours underneath their R34s with rust converters and welding equipment and primer are doing something important, something that doesn't appear on a spec sheet or in a road test, something that happens quietly, in garages, on weekends, in the unglamorous hours. They are keeping the car alive. And on that quiet note, we arrive at the end of our 100 facts. Let me take you there slowly. The R34 GT-R wasn't just a fast car. Let that land gently, not as a bold declaration, just as a true thing, spoken softly in the dark. It was the last Skyline GT-R, the final iteration of a lineage stretching back through decades and generations, ending here in this body with this engine, on these roads and racetracks. The last car to carry both names together. It was the final RB26, the last production road car to be powered by that particular inline six, with its individual throttle bodies and its ball-bearing turbos, and its honestly modest compression ratio that whispered, always, of the larger power available to those who ask for it. The engine is done now. It will not appear in another car. What exists is what was made, and what was made was 11,578 examples, and no more. It was Nürburgring tested, cold morning laps through the green hell, grey light through the forest, engineers with notebooks and data loggers, and the specific patience of people who understand that the truth about a car only comes out when the road becomes genuinely hard. The R34 was taken there, and it came back better for it, and it carried the evidence of those laps in its every system. It was a race-winning machine, a JGTC championship, in its debut season, in the hands of a Frenchman and a Japanese driver, working across a year of Sundays to find the fastest way around circuit after circuit. Preserved now in a heritage collection, brought out occasionally for festival mornings that smell of racing fuel and autumn air. It was a tuner-inspiring platform, the foundation on which Z-Tunes and N1 builds, and 1,000 other visions of what an RB26 could become were constructed. A car that said, structurally and philosophically, I have room. Push me further, see what's here. And because the world had to wait 25 years to truly access it,
because the import laws kept it on the other side of a calendar, visible but untouchable, known but unavailable, loved from a distance for a quarter of a century.
Its legend only grew louder. There is a kind of story that gets better with waiting, that accrues meaning over time rather than losing it, that is told and retold in the years of absence until the telling becomes its own tradition, and the thing being told about arrives finally, carrying all of that accumulated story with it. The R34 GT-R is that story. It arrived in American garages in 2024 wearing everything the years had given it. The film appearances and the video game hours and the forum posts and the bedroom posters. The auction records and the heritage collection and the 19 Z-Tunes and the gold valve covers. The 752 and the championship and the gentleman's agreement and the honest, quiet power kept politely off the brochure. 25 years of waiting converted into weight, into presence, into the particular gravity that only things long desired can possess when they finally arrive. And now it's here, legally, truly, on the right side of the calendar. And somewhere tonight, in a garage, under a careful cover, in a climate-controlled room, or a simple home space with good lighting and a concrete floor, an R34 GT-R is sitting still. The engine has cooled. The boost pressure is 0. The multifunction display is dark. The torque split reading nothing. The G sensor showing flat and calm in all directions. The last Skyline. The final RB26. Resting. As you are resting. As everything eventually comes to rest. 100 facts, 9 chapters, hours of quiet road. Thank you for making this journey. Sleep well.